You can see the setup that I have here. I'm kneeling on the floor, but sitting on a chair is great too. So generally the head leads and the body follows. And Alexander noticed, you may remember his story, he had a voice problem and he discovered there was a series of tensions, the things he used to do before he spoke that he realized were causing the problem, and he tried to stop doing them. I think I told this story on the talk, so I'm assuming most of you already know it. He tried to stop doing it and found that he couldn't. He had mirrors set up, one in the corner over here and another one over there facing him, so he could look directly into the mirror and see his profile. At first, he wasn't used to paying attention, so he didn't notice anything, but the more he looked, the more refined his ability to sense what was going on became. And he noticed that before he moved, he did this funny sequence of movements. Tightened up at the back of his neck and pulled his head back and down. He'd take a gasping breath. And just before he moved, he'd then compress himself. And, he couldn't really stop it. He'd try to... and not only could he not stop it when speaking, it was he discovered that it used to occur whatever he was doing. Whether he was lifting something up or reaching for something, first of all there would be this compression in his neck and altering of the breathing pattern, and then this general bracing of himself in order to move. And anyway, he taught himself to not do that and instead to maintain a state of poise before, during and after anything that he did. And not only did his voice problem disappear, but there was this general improvement in everything that he did. And one of the things he found was that even though his whole body was involved in this compression, it was always his neck that tightened first. And it was this that led him to this idea of the controlling influence that the head has. He was also very interested in horses, and he knew about the importance of how a horse holds its head for how it can, how well it can move. And consider if you want to hold something as powerful as a horse on the ground, you don't do it by holding their pelvis, you do it by holding their head. And the experience of primary control is really interesting. In the Alexander technique, you're really learning to maintain this delicate balance through the whole head and neck, no matter what you're doing. Of course, it's different if you're lifting up a 500 kilogram, deadlifting a 500 kilogram weight, you'll need a lot more tension. But still this capacity to organize the head, relative to the rest, or the rest of the body, is organized relative to the head, is fundamentally important. And it's so subtle. That's the thing that's so exasperating about it. Now, normally, the conventional wisdom is you can't really learn this except through having lessons with an Alexander teacher, because Alexander teachers are trained to help a person to become aware in this really subtle way of what you're doing with the head and neck, and that can enable you to not do that and then to experience this different way of moving. And some of you may remember the story I told in that summit talk about the 90-year-old teacher who gave me a lesson. She put her hands on my head and neck here and enabled me to tune in a way that just felt like everything dropped completely. It was the most remarkable experience, and it took about 15 or 20 seconds of working on me. It's such an interesting area to pay attention to, and I've been doing it for a long time. But in a way, the problem of how we sense our body is one of the reasons why it's so difficult to sense this delicate balance. The head balance is really, the reason it's so critical is that inside, directly above the point where the skull is supported, you've got your major organ of balance, semicircular canals, those three little tubes of bone that are filled with fluid. And the skull is heavy, it weighs between 5 to 7 kilograms. And the point of, or the center of gravity of the skull is about here. And the point of support is here directly under the ears, or between the ears there. So that the natural inclination of the head is to fall forward. And plus it's so heavy, and also it's carrying our central nervous system. So we have this intricate set of muscles and structures that maintain the balance of the head. And between the skull and the first two vertebrae, there's little suboccipital muscles, and they're the third most sensitive muscle group in the body, after the muscles of the eye and the tongue. And as soon as your head falls forward, these muscles are stretched, and a muscle spindle sends a signal, I've been stretched, into the brain stem. So, tiny little distance. And then the brain stem gets that message, and it sends a message back saying, tighten up. So that those muscles at the back tighten up, and then the ones in the front are stretched. They send a signal in there. And so it lets go, and it goes forward. And so there's this feedback loop that's, about that long, and the nerves are traveling at 30 meters per second or something, some staggering speed. So the net effect of that is that you can't control this movement. It's much too quick. You can only allow it to happen. So that's the reason why, in Alexander, there's such an emphasis on just taking away interferences from this experience of poise rather than trying to actually construct a new way of moving. Alexander generally didn't like exercise because he felt that people would bring this distorted sense of their body to whatever they're doing. But there is a lot you can do if you just focus on clarifying how the head balances and what it's balancing on. And that's really what we're going to explore today. So could you sit near your table? And first of all, just take your hands and place them just below your ears. There's that little notch there, the base of your skull at the back, and between there you could probably feel the sides of your spine. And in fact, if you take your fingers and you move down the side of your neck, you can feel the sides of the spine, the transverse processes they're called. Just take a moment to feel that. And notice what you're doing. When you're doing that, are you holding your breath? Or are you holding yourself still in some way in order to pay attention closely? Well, for a moment, just leave that and just let your hands be there with your fingers still on your, the base of your ears there, and just tune in. Sense what you feel through your whole body. Maybe notice the way you're moving as you're breathing. And notice which parts of your body come to mind. Are there some areas that stand out more than others? See, sense, as you're sitting here now, where you feel your middle. The middle of your body. And it's the you in your. Where do you feel the middle of your body now? Probably where you feel yourself. Notice that area. Put a hand there where you feel that. it's something that changes all the time. I mean, look where I've got mine. I've got it in my upper stomach. I've been doing this for more than 30 years. And still, when I'm a bit stressed or, something, my sense of my body will change. So notice where you feel that sense of your center at the moment. We might call it your functional center. And just get a sense of the extent of the parts of your body you can feel. The felt sense of your body. Where is it at the moment? Is it more at the front or the back? Maybe you feel one side more than the other. And you don't have to change anything, just sense where you actually feel it. And of course, you don't have to change anything because everything's changing all the time. See, notice as you tune in now to the felt sense of your body, how the sensations change. Maybe you feel some parts of your body relaxing, because if you're holding on to some places you don't need to hold, naturally, as soon as you become aware of it, you just let it go. And when you do let it go, notice how that changes the sense of the inner landscape. Maybe it spreads a little. And just follow now as one part after another starts to relax through your body. Notice how your breathing follows along with those changes, so that as you become aware of a different part of your body, as that inner landscape opens out, so too your breathing changes, the sense of your breath. And if you're sensing the front, sense the back. Or if it was the back, sense the front, sense the opposite side to where you were sensing. Maybe consider the soles of the feet and the palms of your hands. And now that we're tuning into the change in sensation directly, now spread your attention down into the center of your pelvis. In fact, could you place your hands on the top of the bony wings of the pelvis? And if you're sitting on a chair, maybe you have the sensation of the sitting bones against the bottom of the chair, and then you have the hands at the top. And the center of the pelvis, and indeed the center of the body, is between those two, in the middle. So now place your attention into the center of your pelvis. Consider from the center of your pelvis to your underarms, through your shoulders and neck to your head, and from the center of your pelvis through your legs down to your feet. So now you know, we have this ability to focus our attention in one spot and then to spread our attention through to the whole body, or to switch it about. Now, could you once again come back to placing your hands just on the below your ears? Now, that's the top of your spine. And notice now whether you're able to feel or to listen with your hands to your neck here with more relaxation, whether it's taking less effort now. So where you have your fingers there, that's the top of the spine, that's the top of the neck. One of the challenges we have is that often we tend to think of the neck as being under our chin in the front, you know, because our face comes down to there. But of course the top of the neck is behind the nose. You know, so the back of the neck comes up to the back of the head. The front of the neck comes right up to the back of the nose. And it's an interesting thing when we're considering the way our head is balanced on top of the spine, that there are two main parts to the skull. Is the cranial skull, which is all this part up here, the top of the eye sockets and round, you know, through the top of the nose and back into the back of the head. Then there's the visceral skull. And the visceral skull is both jaws. And the tongue is attached to the jaw, and the tongue is attached to the trachea, and in fact the entire tube of the gut. And that's in the front of our face. So when we're considering head balance, it's not just a matter of sensing the skull or the spine. It's also what's happening inside, you know, the organization of the organs and what's happening into all the muscles in our face. So place your hands there once again. Maybe you could put your elbows on the table. And balance yourself here. And what I mean by balance yourself really is just tune in and feel what's going on. So we've got the skull, you know, these two parts of the skull, the cranial skull and the visceral skull. And I'm sorry for all the explanation here, but it's, you know, to explain this concept, we really need the background. But you've got the cranial skull and the visceral skull. And the cranial skull, you know, that relates to the spine. So once again, feel the sides of the spine. Place your hands there on the sides of the spine. And now, if you move your fingers forward, you can feel in front of the spine and behind the trachea. Can you do that where you sort of push your fingers into the sides of your neck? It's into the throat there. So what you're feeling there is the back wall of the throat. And you know, you may be pushing the trachea forward, that goes down and becomes the lungs. And this is this really interesting thing about the way our body is organized. Some of you may have seen Tom Meyer's presentation at the summit, and you know, the way the muscles all down the back line, as he calls it, that extend up, you know, mostly across the back of the spine. So if you put your hands on the side here and you feel the muscle at the back, you know, you go into the center of the spine, you've got that little bumpy bit, the spinous processes, and on either side of that you've got pairs of muscles which join onto the base of the skull at the back and then go all the way down into the shoulder girdle and down the back and right down to the spine. And maybe you put your hands right down to the spine and onto the pelvis, you know, to get a sense of the muscle in the back. And then, you know, at the back of the pelvis, then you've got the gluteal muscles, the back of the pelvis, the buttocks. Feel that. Right down the back of the buttocks and down the back and the sides of the legs, down to the outside of the feet. So these powerful muscles extending right through the back of our body, but they also go through the front, and they're just as powerful. Place your hands on the front, on the top of your pelvis, on the bony wings there. And consider iliopsoas. It's two big muscles. The psoas muscle runs from just where the diaphragm joins the lumbar vertebra and continues right down in front of the spine and then over the front of the pelvis and joins onto the inside of the legs. Big muscles. And then this bone, the bony wing here, in front of that, there's this large muscle called iliacus that goes in the same direction. It goes over this whole bone and then over the front of the pelvis and joins onto the inside of each leg. And then from there's all that muscle that goes down the inside of the leg to the inside of the foot. So with your hands on your hips here, just consider those powerful muscles on the front and the back of the pelvis that continue down into the legs. And from the back of the pelvis, it continues up onto the rib cage. And in fact, if you lift your hand up, you can feel those really solid muscles there, you know, that join into the rib cage here. So from the inside and the outside, from the top of the pelvis, these muscles go, and then up through the front of the spine and then up to the front of the neck here. So the skull is held on, you know, using these powerful muscles right around the back. So the other thing is the thickness. You know, to really free your neck, it's useful to know what it's sitting on, and it's sitting on top of the spine. So feel from the front to the back here of the neck. Place your thumbs in the side of the neck here, so you feel the side of the spine, and you can get a sense of the size of the vertebra there. They're not that big, and they're, you know, they can turn sideways. A lot of freedom in here. And then it comes down into the rib cage. They flatten out a bit, but they have the ribs on either side. And then but progressively getting larger till you come down the sides of the spine. And if you go down to where your put your hands on the top of the pelvis, right near the top there is you know, about half the depth of your body is where the lumbar vertebra go. They're quite big. So there's this column that's small at the top, and it curves in a series of curves and comes down and joins onto the pelvis. And it curves in two directions. You can feel the lumbar curve and the curve of your neck. And then you've got thoracic curve and the curve of the sacrum and the curve of the back of your head. So could you place your hands together on the table? Place your elbows on the table. And just take a moment to soften here. And we'll consider that your hands are your head, sitting on top of the wrist. And look at your hands, sense from the little finger to the thumbs, you know, the width of the hand. And you could allow your fingers to soften a little bit to make a round sort of shape that's like your head. And of course, that may be complicated because the hand and the forearm often carry a lot of tension that we don't really need. But sit with it, just observe it, allow the weight of your hands to sit there, soften the hands there. And just move the fingers forward and back a little bit. A tiny little movement. Now there's a very small range of movement that you can do with the fingers before your hands need to, before the wrists need to move. If you do a bigger movement, if you look at me here, I do a bigger movement, my wrists have to move, don't they, and the forearms. Well, could you stay here for a second? Try doing that with your head. Try doing a tiny movement forward and up. So you're just tilting, the nose drops down, the nose lifts up. The back of the head lifts up, back of the head comes down. And now if you make that bigger and you do a slightly bigger movement of your head, then the neck gets involved. Do you see that? Now, how small does that movement need to be? Experiment with, can you move your head? So, maybe put your hands back on the ears here, just below the ears, and do the tiniest movement of your head, where it feels like your neck doesn't move. And this is a pretty interesting thing, because, sense as you're doing this tiny, tiny movement, what happens through the rest of your spine? Consider a seal, the way a seal will slice through the water, leap out of the water and dive down again. The agility that a seal has. That's organizing its movement from its head. Imagine if its head wasn't straight. If its pointed nose was off to the side, it'd create a slipstream, wouldn't it? And it'd, become like a break. But no, when it's going down into the water, the center of its head points down so it becomes like a dart. And we're the same. Not quite as agile in the water. But just notice this tiny movement. Now, in order to feel this tiny movement, you have to soften. You have to relax everything else. Minimize the amount of tension that you have through your body so everything else can soften. So to slice through the water like a dolphin or a seal, the whole spine is going to move like a wave. So could you imagine yourself doing that? In this very slow movement, as your head rolls forward, it's like you're going to dive under the water, and as your head comes back, you go down, and then you come in an arc, you come back out of the water, and then your head goes forward, you arc through the air, and then back down into the water. And the whole of your spine will follow. Wherever your head turns, your body will go. Lovely. Leave that for a moment. Rest there. Now, look at that glass of water. Pick it up. It's level. The surface of the water is level. And if I tip the glass, the water still remains level. Whichever way I move the glass, the water still remains level. Now just have a sip of the water and feel the way it goes down. Get a sense of the throat, the channel of the throat. Get a sense as it goes down inside the trachea, down into the, not the trachea, down through the esophagus and into the stomach. And could you do that again, but this time, could you focus your attention on the back of the spine? So think of all the structures behind the spine, behind the transverse processes at the side, right down into the pelvis. And as you're drinking the water, this is coming down into the front. Lovely. So the head, is looking for level, and level is relative to the center of the earth. So it's the pull of gravity down. So, it's that arc right on the center of the earth where we are. And there's fluid in those semicircular canals through the body. And no matter what we do, we make these adjustments. The head will adjust so that we can remain level. Consider a cat, leaping into the air and then flipping over and coming down and landing evenly on its feet. But if we hold ourselves tight, if we maintain an uneven balance of the muscular system through our body, that can throw things out, and we need to make some compensations. So you put your hands there on the base of the neck again. And consider each side of your neck, each side of your head here. Does it feel parallel with the floor? Or the roof? Once again, don't change anything. Let it be exactly the way it is, because there's really good sense for why you're organized this way. And then sense the pelvis. Sense the sitting bones on the chair. Does that feel parallel if you draw a line between the two sitting bones on the chair? And now, can you contract and relax your pelvic floor? And get a sense of how that movement, does that lift evenly up to each side of the head, or does it tend to pull in a different direction? And once again, don't try and change anything. Allow yourself to be exactly where you are. But contract and relax your pelvic floor. And when you're doing that with the pelvic floor, you're now sensing the front of your body. So we have muscles in the front and the back of the spine, and then we have the viscera, all the organs, and then we have a whole series of structures, muscle and rib and fascia that supports that. So now could you place your hands up under your head again? And now sensing each side of your pelvis, move your jaw side to side slowly. In fact, in time with your breath. So you can have a sense of all those parts of your body moving as you're breathing in front of the spine. right up behind your nose, back wall of the throat. And now if you leave that there, if you now move, stay where you are with the hands there, but move your head in that tiny movement again, notice something really interesting. You know, the spine can stay where it is, but when you're lifting your head up, the tongue goes with it. The larynx. You know, the structures inside the throat may be moved. So this delicate balance of the head on top of the spine that's central to experiencing lightness and ease also involves the tube of the gut. Now let your hands down and rest there for a moment. And come back and place your elbows on the table and your hands and could you move the heels of your hands, the wrists, side to side? And look at them as you're doing that. You know, soften through your upper arms. Soften through the whole body so you can make this easy. And now could you move your head side to side in the same way? So we're moving from the top of the neck. You're moving one ear over to the side, and then you come back to the middle as your wrists come back to the middle. Then you move the other ear over to the side and back to the middle. And then one ear over. And notice if it moves more easily in one direction. And could you consider your forearms as a microcosm of the rest of your body? So if you feel any tension in your forearms, you know, when it's 2/3 of the way down, consider 2/3 down the rest of your body. And just pay attention there and notice, is that similar? So one ear to one side, then the other ear. Moving the base of the head side to side, but the top of the head is staying where it is. And you may notice yourself tightening in the legs, or maybe even in the ribs, you know, between the shoulder blades. But if you sense that, if you just notice that area, you may find it softens. And you may notice the parts of your wrist that are closer to you, the thumbs. You know, that's like We might say like the back of your head, the back of the neck, and the parts of the wrists near the little, at the bottom of the little fingers, like the front of your head. So consider the shape of the spinal column, front and back of the spinal column. As you're moving your head side to side, you're moving the top of the spine side to side, a tiny little movement. And of course, to do that, the rest of the spine has to move too. And now well, take your hands down, rest for a second. Move your jaw side to side and sense the top of the neck, the back of the nose, top of the neck at the front, and how the jaw moves side to side. It may move more easily in one direction, not so easily in the other. Don't force it, let it be where it is, because the organization of your jaw is a good metaphor for what's happening through the rest of your body. And if it doesn't go easily over to one side, it probably means there's something else happening through the hips or the torso that also doesn't want to move there. Place your hands back on the table again. And just lift one hip and then the other. Gently, a tiny movement. So one hip lifts up toward the base of the skull. The other hip lifts up toward the base of the skull. And in fact, could you move the heels of your hands side to side? As you lift one hip, and I'm talking about a tiny movement here. Tiny movement. So that you could feel what is happening through the whole spine. Might be easier if you think of the front and the back of the underarms. So you can soften in the shoulder girdle. And notice, are the heels of your hands moving in the direction of the side that's coming up? And also, is the ear on that side moving over in that direction? Keep noticing if you're bracing anywhere or tightening up. Just do it in a way that feels easy. And, if you only can go a little way to one side, that's fine. Because even if a seal, had an injury, it would just adapt itself, and slice through the water just as beautifully. So sense, from your head right down to your pelvis. And then leave that. And why don't you now lie down on the floor on your back? awareness, how you sink into the floor. And the parts of yourself you can sense differently from before. Place your fingers on either side of your neck again and allow your elbows to just rest there on your torso to the best of your ability. Sense the sides of your neck here, and once again just, trace with your fingertips the side of the neck, feel the muscle at the back, and then the space in front of the spine, behind the trachea. And then put your hands there again. Think of all that muscle down the back of your body, down the back of the spine, the back of the underarms and shoulders, your ribs, the lower back, and then all those big muscles in the pelvis, in the back of the pelvis, the buttocks, back of the legs, and in the front of the pelvis. And down the inside of the legs to the feet, the outside of the legs to the feet. And then think of the weight of your viscera, the weight of all the organs sitting on top of the spine, on top of the rib cage. And the tube of muscle that surrounds that. And now could you take your fingers, the middle finger is underneath the neck there. Could you move your elbows in a very small circle? Let your elbows move in a circle, still holding on to the base of your neck. And you may feel your shoulder blades moving, your collarbones moving. And as you feel that freedom through the rib cage, as you do this small movement in harmony with your breath, you may be able to feel the weight of your body pressing down onto all the muscle and skin in contact with the floor. And your head can be still as you do this. If you make the movement small enough, your neck can be soft. And now let your arms down by your side. Notice what you feel. And now could you move your jaw around in a circle? Move your jaw around in a circle. And feel each side of the jaw, joining onto the base of the skull there. And whether the circle of the skull, in fact, place your fingers, leave that for a moment, just rest. Notice what that's enabled you to feel through your throat and mouth. The space inside the mouth, the space in front of the neck, the space at the top of the spine where your skull joins on. Once again, place the middle fingers below your ears. And, your thumbs are resting against the sides of your neck, probably. Move your jaw around in a very small circle, minimizing the amount of effort that you're using and sensing the space in front of your neck. And sense through the neck right down into the torso, into the visceral space. Maybe you could move your elbows if it was easy. Move your elbows in a circle at the same time. So you can sense the movement down inside the viscera, right down into the pelvis, and around the outside of the body, the shoulder blades sliding across your back. And here's the interesting thing. As you're doing these movements, sense the base of your skull. The back of the skull behind the neck, and the front of the skull behind the nose, the roof of the nose. And sense how that is oriented to the rest of your body. Now leave that for a moment. You could consider, still think of that orientation of the base of your skull to the rest of your body, but just rest there. Could you do the tiniest nodding of your head as if you're going, no, and drawing your head down toward the floor and then going, really? And your head would go forward. The tiniest movement. Tiny enough that you could sense the underside of your skull. And imagine it relative to the rest of your body. And as you're doing this, you may find that even though it's a tiny movement, if you do it in time with your breath, and I don't mean breathe in time with the movement, I mean just to be breathing and to do this tiny movement of your head in harmony with what you're naturally doing with your breath, you may find that the rest of your body is involved. You may find as you consider the space inside the throat and, through the spine and the muscle in the back down into the torso, that the whole spine is influenced by this. Now leave that. Place your hands at the base of your ears. Notice if it's easier to do that now, to let your hand just rest against your body. And consider, let your hands be soft. Consider the width of the hands. From the little fingers to the thumbs, and the width of the wrists. The width of your elbows. And the width of the underarms, the width of the shoulders. So you can feel perhaps the movement of your ribs as you breathe. And as you do breathe, you feel the ribs moving sideways. Could you make a tiny movement with the heels of the hands? As you breathe in, let the heels of the hands go out. As you breathe in, the heels of the hands go in. It's more that they're going with the breath. Now leave that with your hands, but still keep that awareness of the breath. And now could you move your ear, one ear to one side, and then the other ear to the other. So you're pushing the top of your neck side to side, but a very small movement, like your head's not sliding, the head is staying there, but the lower half of the head, the bottom of the head is moving side to side. So the top of your neck and the bottom of your head move side to side. You're sort of swiveling there on the floor. And notice what's happening through your spine. As your head moves over to the left, as the bottom of the head moves over to the left, does your left leg draw up toward the head? And as your head goes over to the right, does the right side shorten? The right leg comes up toward, and the right shoulder goes down. You could allow that to happen. So as the bottom of your head goes over to one side, even if it's a very small movement, draw the leg of that side. You shorten that side, which means that your pelvis is rotating. Just as your head moves over to the side, your pelvis moves over to the opposite side. Now leave that. Let your arms down by your side. Sense from your head right down to your feet. Now once again do that, but without your hands there. Move the top of the head over to the side. Sorry, the bottom of the head over to the side. You're moving the bottom of your ears to each side, the top of the neck to one side, then the other. Feeling how when you do that, you move your head over to one side, that leg and the hip draw up toward the head. And same on the other side. But notice the front and the back. See if you can spread your attention all the way through your body. Front and the back, down the back of the spine. Well, and the muscles in the front of the spine as well. Front and the back of the pelvis. And then in the front of the spine. The whole visceral space, right through the throat and mouth, up into your nose. And make sense, of how this works for you. So if you're more restricted to one side, go softly in that direction so it can be smooth. Maybe you're imagining yourself as that seal now, diving through the water. Top of your head leading, and the whole of your body able to follow. And the more that you can follow your natural breath, the more that you can move the way your body wants to move, the easier this will be. And maybe the more fluidly you move now, you can feel the way you're sliding inside the suit of skin. So you could look outside the top of your head. It's the bottom of our head. We're moving side to side, but the top is moving. Can you imagine now that you're steering from the top of your head? And you're leaping through the water into the air and then back down. And if you catch yourself bracing anywhere, just leave it, stop and let it go. And then leave that and rest. Notice your contact with the floor now. the sense of space within you. And consider the top of your head and the bottom of your head. You could open your eyes. You could, paying attention to that sense of the head being balanced on top of the spine, roll onto your side and come up to stand slowly. And notice how it is to stand here. Place your hands once again just underneath your ears. Consider the side of your neck and all those two zones, the cranial skull and of the spine and all the muscles in the back and front of it. And then the visceral skull, your jaws. So you sense the base of the skull and the top of the skull. And soften through the front and back of your body. In fact, let your arms back down. And notice as you sway there, the delicate balance of your head on top of your neck. Behind the nose, beneath the ears. And turn and look around you. And then walk and just sense, how is it to move when you really allow that delicate balance of your head to be present. And walk and sense how that is.